This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Former President Trump is ordered to pay over $350 million in the New York civil fraud trial. And New York Attorney General Letitia James is about to speak after the $355 million verdict against Trump. Here's that right now. All right, but before we get to that, to learn more about the case, we turn now to our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards. Arlene, what happened here in this New York civil fraud trial?
So the decision did come down today. I didn't actually see the decision, but according to the reports, the total amount of the decision, the judge's decision, was $364 million. Now, out of that, Trump personally has to pay $355 million. His two sons, Eric and Donald, have to pay $4 million each, and the former CFO, Alan Weisselberg, has to pay $1 million. Now, Trump is also barred from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation or other legal entity for 3 years, and his sons are barred for 2 years. So this was the case that the judge had already decided last September. He decided that there was fraud. He agreed with Letitia James, and this trial was just to determine the amount. Letitia James originally had asked for $250 million, and I think about 5 years of Trump not being able to do business in New York. She upped the number to $370 million toward the end of the trial, and she said he should be permanently barred. So in terms of, you know, the barring of him doing business, the judge decided only 3 years, not permanently, but there's still going to be a lot of damage to his business and to the city.
Now, also today in Georgia, the hearing on the motion to disqualify Fani Willis continued into day 2. Now, what were the highlights from today? So
today there were maybe three witnesses that I saw. I think there was another one ongoing, before I came here today. Two of the witnesses, there wasn't really that much. Her father testified, and he confirmed that he has raised her to keep cash in the house. That was part of her testimony yesterday, that her father always taught her to keep cash in the house, and this was her explanation for why she always paid Nathan Wade in cash when she reimbursed him. There was another witness, Terrence Bradley. He was a little more interesting. Terrence Bradley was actually there yesterday, and he's a former business partner with Nathan Wade. And he also was the attorney that represented Nathan Wade in his divorce proceeding, which just ended late last year. So he was asserting the attorney-client privilege to say that I can't talk about anything that happened between Nathan Wade and Fani Willis, because all of that conversation would have occurred while he was my client. So I can't talk about that. So he presented himself as like a hostile witness. So today the attorney spent a lot of time trying to get around this privilege and try and figure out what kinds of questions could they ask him that wouldn't be considered privilege. And what they wanted him to talk about was the relationship. And apparently he initially did talk to one of the attorneys off the record and actually told her he knew a lot of information. But his attorney friends and colleagues of Nathan Wade kind of pressured him not to testify. So by the time he came yesterday, he had decided that he shouldn't testify. So that's still unfolding. They're still trying to figure out, what he can say and what he can't say. But I think it's pretty clear he knows that there was some kind of a relationship before 2021 when Nathan Wade was hired. So that's very important to them.
Arlene, thank you for those updates.
You're welcome.
In Missouri, 2 teenagers have been charged in connection with the shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade. They now face charges related to gun possession and resisting arrest. The shooting took place Wednesday in downtown Kansas City. Authorities said it all stems from a dispute between several people, which later ended in gunshots. One person was killed and 22 others were injured. Right now, the suspects are held at a juvenile facility. Officials said additional charges could be on the way as the investigation continues. The reported death of a Russian dissident stirring new debate in the 2024 presidential campaigns. Former President Trump's opponents trying to tie Trump to the Russian regime, while Trump fights back. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
President Biden, in a Friday speech, blamed Russian President Vladimir Putin personally for the reported death of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. President Biden asked that he hopes Republicans in Congress should now be more supportive of Ukraine aid. Watch.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. We have to provide the funding so Ukraine can keep defending itself against Putin's vicious onslaughts and war crimes.
Russian authorities said on Friday that Navalny died in prison after feeling suddenly unwell during a walk. President Biden said the U.S. has yet to figure out what exactly happened. Notably, though, Biden used his speech to target former President Trump, again criticizing Trump's recent comments that he would not protect NATO countries that were not paying their fair.
And former President Trump is about to speak after the $355 million verdict against him in the New York case. Here's that feed right now.
The banks all got their money, 100%. They love Trump. They testified that Trump is great customer, one of our best customers. They testified beautifully. And the judge knows that. He's just a corrupt person. And we knew that from the beginning. We knew it right from the beginning because he wouldn't give it to the commercial division. This judge thought Mar-a-Lago is worth $18 million and it's worth anywhere from 50 to 100 times that amount. So we realized that. He ruled against me before he even got the case. He ruled against me, said I was guilty. He didn't know what I was guilty of before he even got the case. And Letitia James, that's another case altogether. She's a horribly corrupt attorney general, and it's all having to do with election interference. There were no victims, because the banks made a lot of money. They made $100 million. And by the way, I paid approximately $300 million in taxes as the migrants come in and they take over New York. I paid over this period of years over $300 million in taxes. And they want me out. Well, let's see if we can get them out. These are radical left Democrats. They're lunatics. And it's election interference. So I just want to thank you for being here. Will it be successful? I think because, frankly, if we're not successful, New York State is gone. People are moving out of New York State. And because of this, they're going to move out at a much faster rate. They used a statute. It's a consumer fraud statute. It's never been used for a thing like this before. They used it on me because I'm running for president. I'm beating Biden by a lot. We're beating not only the Republicans, we're beating Biden by a lot. The poll came out today, we're up 20 points on Biden. If I weren't running, none of this stuff would have ever happened. None of these lawsuits would have ever happened. Nothing would, I would have had a nice life. But I enjoy this life for a different reason. We're going to make America great again. These are corrupt people. These are people that shouldn't be allowed to do the things they do. And they're using this as weaponization against a political opponent who's up a lot in the polls and always will be, because I'm competing with a man who can't put two sentences together, who doesn't know what he's doing. And we're heading into a third world war because of this guy. We have to win this election. They're doing everything possible to step in our way, but we're not going to stand for it. So thank you very much. We will get back to work. It's a ridiculous award. A fine of $355 million for doing a perfect job, for having paid back a loan with no defaults, with no problems. The banks were totally, at the trial they testified. We had an expert witness from the Stern School at NYU that made the statement. And I was very honored by his statement. He's one of the most respected people anywhere in the country for doing this kind of thing, expert witness. He said this is one of the greatest financial statements I have ever witnessed before. And he talked about even the detail. So my numbers actually were extremely conservative. They saw this, so what the judge did is he brought down certain values like Mar-a-Lago, made it ridiculous. But the expert, after having all of this, testifies one of the best financial statements he's ever seen. And I was honored by that. But I also knew we have a corrupt judge. He's not a respected man. And again, I said before, he's been overturned on this case by the appellate division 4 times already. It's a record. Nobody's ever been overturned on one case 4 times. And I think very importantly, and I think ultimately the most important, we've employed tens of thousands of people in New York, and we pay taxes like few other people have ever paid in New York. And they don't care about that. It's a state that's going bust. It's a state that's going bust because everybody's leaving. And it's all headed up by Biden, who's destroying our country. So this is Russia, this is China, this is what you've been reading about all your lives, and it's happening right here in our country. Thank you very much. We will stop it. We will make America great again. You have my word. Thank you very much.
President Trump, sell any of the assets to pay for this verdict? Do you plan to sell anything?
A former FBI informant has been charged with lying about President Biden. The source is accused of reporting false information about Biden, his son Hunter Biden, and their alleged involvement with a Ukrainian energy company. David Weiss is the special counsel investigating the president's son. In a statement on Thursday, Weiss said former federal informant Alexander Smirnov has been indicted by a federal grand jury. Prosecutors said Smirnov falsely reported to the FBI in 2020 that Hunter and Joe Biden were paid $5 million each in bribes some years earlier. The money, he said, came from Ukrainian energy company Burisma. The grand jury found cause to believe that Smirnov's story was a fabrication. The indictment alleges that what Smirnov reported was, quote, an amalgam of otherwise unremarkable business meetings. An attorney for Hunter Biden said the charges show the probe against the president's son is based on dishonest allegations. Smirnov was arrested on Wednesday and faces up to 25 years in prison. Special counsel Robert Hur will soon be the one answering questions. Hur will testify before the House Judiciary Committee on March 12th, according to sources close to the situation. Last week, he released a report on his investigation into President Biden's handling of classified documents. Hur and his team determined there wasn't evidence to support a prosecution. However, the writing in the report cast Biden as an elderly man who could be forgetful at times. Biden responded by blasting Hur's characterization shortly after the release of the report from a White House podium. Attorney General Merrick Garland objected to the report, criticizing it, quote, multiple denigrating statements, unquote. House Republicans contacted Hur about testifying before the committee regarding his findings. GOP committee chairs also want the Justice Department to give Congress audio recordings and transcripts from Hur's interview with Biden. Joining us now to discuss the ruling in Trump's New York civil fraud case, we have David Gelman. He is a criminal defense attorney and a former federal prosecutor. David Gelman, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Now, in the New York civil fraud case, Judge Arthur Engoron has fined Trump $354 million and barred him from doing business in the state for 3 years. Now, this is less than what AG Letitia James wanted, which was to bar him for life in the state. What is your reaction to all of this?
Honestly, I'm kind of surprised he did not bar Donald Trump for life. During the trial, Engoron really had very little patience for President Trump, and it really showed. Now, we all knew that he was going to slap down President Trump and give him a astronomical fine and pretty much do something that's unconstitutional, and he did everything like that today. This was a terrible decision by him. This is going to be appealed. Donald Trump's lawyers already had said that. In fact, they said that last night. They've been saying it for days. If they could have filed the appeal prior to today, they would have. They were not allowed. This is something that is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened in the state of New York. And we have to understand, there has not been a victim here. So why there is a fine like this to begin with, that is a mystery in itself. Why there is a penalty of Donald Trump not being able to control his own organization for 3 years, that is a mystery in itself. And why this case was even brought, that really is not a mystery, because we all understand why. It's a political hit job, if you will. But again, that is why there is an appeal process, and the New York courts will be getting their hands on it and hopefully rectifying the situation.
Now, the judge has also barred Trump and his company from applying to bank loans in New York for those 3 years. Now, what does that mean for Trump's organizations, especially on the business side?
Well, So what's going to happen is these trustees, if you will, are now going to be running or allegedly running the Trump organization, all the hotels and the properties in the state of New York. However, again, this is going to be appealed, and they are filing an emergent appeal, I would assume. Hopefully what will happen is that they are going to stay Erdogan's opinion. And if they stay that opinion, that means that the opinion is frozen. So everything can go back to the status quo. So the Trump organization can be run by Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., whoever else is running the Trump organization, while the case is pending appeal and being fought in the appellate divisions.
Now, reports are also noting that this could wipe out Trump's entire stockpile of cash. Given this appeal process, how would that impact that?
Well, from what I've been told, or from what I've been reading at least, in the event that the appeal is not granted, or the stay is not granted, he would have to pay that $355 million into the state of New York, into an escrow account. Now, he could do it a couple different ways. Number one, he could put it into go to his personal account. I don't know how much money Donald Trump has personal cash. Obviously, that's a lot of money. Number two, he could go to through a bond. Obviously, he would, in order to do that, he would have to put up certain collateral, and that's obviously a very expensive proposition as well. Either way, it's not something that Donald Trump or pretty much anybody would want to do or go forward in doing, but it's something obviously the law would require you to do. But either way, this is something, and I know this is going to sound weird, but it's probably going to help Donald Trump politically, due to the fact that everybody sees that, again, there is no victim in this matter. So why is Donald Trump, or the Trump organization in general, being fined such a significant amount of money and being harmed in a significant amount of way when nobody was harmed? In fact, everybody in fact made money and was happy with the transactions that occurred. The banks in this situation testified. They wanted Donald Trump. They went after him. He was a whale, as they called it, a good client. They made money, and he paid on time with interest. So it doesn't make sense. The only reason that he was gone after for all these years by Letitia James, who said in the beginning of her campaign that her whole campaign is based on going after Mr. Trump, the only reason that she went after him is for political purposes, and it is all coming to fruition now.
David Gelman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Joining us now to discuss the court hearing in Georgia and how likely Fani Willis will be disqualified, we have Mike Davis. He's the founder and president of Article 3 Project and a former law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Mike Davis, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in the Georgia case hearing on motions to disqualify Fani Willis has entered day 2 today. How likely is Judge Scott McAfee to disqualify her?
I think it's very likely that the judge disqualifies both Fulton County DA Fani Willis along with her not-so-secret boyfriend / special prosecutor Nathan Wade, because not only have they lied to the court and lied to the court repeatedly about the nature of their relationship and when it started and how Nathan Wade paid for trips and how she reimbursed for those trips, supposedly. I think the biggest problem is that it's very obvious that the relationship started before Fani Willis brought her unprecedented indictment against President Trump and 18 others for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election. And then after she brought this indictment, she took these illegal trips, these illegal kickbacks from her boyfriend. And so it shows that she had a financial interest in this criminal prosecution, which is absolutely illegal.
Now, Fani Willis's father testified today, and he said that she kept the location of her home a secret due to threats. Now, What did you make of her father testifying, but the prosecution not calling on Fani Willis today?
I think that they're trying to call in the father to create some sort of sympathy for Fani Willis. She's clearly guilty. She clearly lied to the court. She clearly took illegal kickbacks from her boyfriend. She paid her unqualified boyfriend out of taxpayer money $250 an hour, $700,000 to meet with the Biden White House, including the Biden White House counsel, to bring these bogus charges against a presidential candidate, a political enemy, and 18 of their supporters. And so there's not enough sympathy in the world with her father that's going to save Fani Willis from her clear violations of the law, her clear perjury, her clear subornation of perjury, her clear illegal kickbacks, her clear illegal financial stake in a criminal prosecution.
Speaking of perjury, at 1:24 p.m. yesterday during Nathan Wade's testimony, the courtroom camera pans and zooms in on Fani Willis in the back of the courtroom, listening in on Nathan Wade's testimony. That's about over an hour. Now, did she commit perjury by saying that she didn't hear his testimony when the courtroom camera showed that she was there?
It sounds, if she's listening to his testimony and she's on camera listening to his testimony, and then she angrily storms into the courtroom right after his testimony and testifies that she wasn't listening to his testimony, that's perjury.
Now, besides this whole motion to disqualify, Trump and his co-defendants are also looking to dismiss the case. How likely is that?
I think it's very likely that Fani Willis and Nathan Wade are disqualified. I think this judge should also dismiss these charges without prejudice. And so the Georgia Attorney General can assign a new prosecutor if he chooses, and that new prosecutor can make an independent judgment, untainted by this relationship, untainted by this financial interest that Fani Willis has in this litigation, and then that prosecutor can decide whether to bring these charges again. I think any sane prosecutor would not bring these charges because it's not a crime to object to a presidential election. It's allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887. If it were a crime, Democrats would be in prison for objecting to Republican wins in 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. We don't see Al Gore and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton in prison for objecting to Republican wins.
And given how this hearing has been unfolding, what is your big picture view of this case in terms of Trump's other cases as well?
I think that this case down in Georgia is falling apart. I don't think there's any chance they're going to be able to get Trump tried and convicted before November 5th, 2024, which is the Democrats' goal with their lawfare and election interference.
Mike Davis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
New York Attorney General Letitia James just spoke now to address the ruling against former President Trump and the New York civil fraud trial.
Today, justice has been served. Today, we prove that no one is above the law. No matter how rich, powerful, or politically connected you are, everyone must play by the same rules. We have a responsibility to protect the integrity of the marketplace.
James celebrated the court ruling as a landmark victory. She said Trump and his organization engaged in deceptive business practices and committed financial fraud for years. The New York Attorney General is the one who filed the case. She had promised to prosecute Trump while she was on the campaign trail. Trump's attorney has vowed to appeal the ruling. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia announced he is not running for president. This comes following months of speculation that he might launch a third-party campaign. Manchin said in a speech at West Virginia University today, quote, "I will not be seeking a third-party run. I will not be involved in a presidential run." The senator added that the Democratic Party is not the same party he was born into and believed in all his life. He also said the Republican Party's not the party that he's always admired. Manchin said he doesn't want to be a deal breaker or a spoiler. Instead of jumping into the race, he's planning to focus on a new group, Americans Together, which promotes moderate politics. The senator has been on a national listening tour. He is set to retire from Congress when his term ends in the beginning of 2025. World leaders and military officials are in Munich, Germany today for a global security conference. Wars in Israel and Ukraine are dominating the discussions. NATO now pressuring the U.S. over wavering support in Congress for Ukraine funding. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
Foreign affairs ministers and top security officials are in Munich this weekend to discuss ongoing world conflicts and potential future ones. Of course, dominating the conversations are the wars going on in Israel and Ukraine. The U.S. is on defense.
I know that there are questions here in Europe and around the world about the future of America's role of global leadership.
The vice president also took a stab at former President Trump for recent comments that he made, saying that NATO countries would lose their protection under his watch if they don't pay their fair share.
Big countries stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
This as NATO is pressuring the U.S. over stalled foreign aid.
We see the impact already of the fact that the U.S. has not been able to make a decision.
The U.S. Congress is the reason for the holdup, specifically lawmakers in the Republican-controlled House who are insisting that America's border security comes first. Also looming large at the conference is the sudden death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, his wife speaking with strong emotions before the world leaders.
I want them to know that they will be punished for what they have done with our country, with my family, and with my husband.
Some suspect 47-year-old Navalny was killed in prison. As for Israel, both the Israeli president and the Palestinian prime minister will speak as the war in Gaza escalates and hostage negotiations continue to stall.
Hostages is dead. We know this. We need a new deal.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with China's foreign minister as the U.S. tries to thaw relations with the Chinese regime. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
U.S. House members introduced a bipartisan bill today that combines border security with military assistance to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details of this new proposed measure.
$66 billion in military assistance, no humanitarian aid for Palestinians, and the suspension of entry of inadmissible migrants at the U.S. border. This is the heart of the Defending Borders, Defending Democracies Act, a bill introduced this Friday by a bipartisan group of congressmen. Republican Brian Fitzpatrick and Democrat Jared Golden, along with 6 other representatives, introduced the bill. It comes in about 30% cheaper than the $95 billion Senate-approved security bill. It includes over $47 billion of defense aid to Ukraine, $10.4 billion for Israel, and just under $5 billion for the Indo-Pacific. President Biden is urging the House to act on a foreign assistance bill.
Now, as I've said before, and I mean this in a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching the House of Representatives. The failure to support Ukraine at this critical moment will never be forgotten.
The Defending Borders, Defending Democracies Act most notably restores the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy and limits the offensive capabilities transferred to Israel to less than 50%. Secretary General of NATO Jens Stoltenberg gave 3 reasons why he feels confident that Congress will continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine.
First, it is in the national security interest of the United States to have a strong NATO. Second, there is actually broad bipartisan support for NATO in the United States. And thirdly, the criticism in the United States is not primarily against NATO.
The House of Representatives is out on a recess until February 28th. Congressmen will have to wait until then to debate the merits of this bill. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss Trump's legal troubles, including the latest ruling in the New York civil fraud case and the hearing in Georgia, we have John Schweppe. He's the Director of Policy at the American Principles Project. John Schweppe, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, the Georgia case on the motion to disqualify Fani Willis is entering into day 2 today. Now, given how the testimony has been going so far, what do you see as the political impact on former President Trump?
Well, there's actually a really real chance that she does get disqualified. And if that happens, from what I understand, the whole schedule of this trial could be reset. There could be a new prosecutor. There's all sorts of things that could really change this and delay it. And, I think if you're Donald Trump, you're looking at the polls right now, you're ahead of Joe Biden. You're kind of up against the clock. You want to get to November before these trials conclude. So I think that would definitely be advantageous for him. And, it's something you don't really see every day. I mean, this is a skilled prosecutor, allegedly, who kind of flubbed it. She was up there and really, I think, just gave away the farm and implicated herself in all sorts of crimes. And it was kind of stunning to see.
To your point, the Georgia elections case does not have a trial date set so far. And if Trump and his co-defendants do get her disqualified or even the case dismissed, the window to go to trial before the 2024 election case is rapidly shrinking and disappearing. Would this actually help Trump?
I think right now Trump is doing very well. I don't think that the American people are necessarily upset by the prosecutions. I think they see it as a political persecution. Now, who knows what would happen if he was actually convicted? That could maybe change the dynamic. So I'm sure the Trump campaign, wants to get past this, or at least delay it until after the election. And so that's probably their perspective. A lot of this stuff is just onerous anyway, and it's just distracting him from being able to campaign, which I'm sure is his priority. But certainly this doesn't hurt. Right. Ultimately, you see this happening. There's a narrative that I think Republican voters certainly believe that, this is political persecution. And I think Fani Willis definitely aided that yesterday and today.
Now, in terms of the New York hush money case, we did see a judge yesterday set a March 25th trial date. Now, this would be the first time a former president and a current presidential nominee would be tried criminally. How do you see that impacting Trump in this upcoming election cycle?
I think in 2016, remember, the stories came out about a month before of sexual impropriety, and it really didn't affect him. He did win. And so, I think ultimately there's a believability issue here. Now, certainly the numbers in this case are staggering, and I think there's a case there for political persecution. But ultimately, I just don't really think that this is going to impact how voters are thinking about Biden versus Trump. They're looking more at Biden's 4 years versus Trump's 4 years, and who would be the better president to lead us forward. So we haven't really seen much evidence that this stuff is really sticking.
Now, in the New York civil fraud trial, a judge today has fined Trump over $300 million and bars him from running businesses in New York for 3 years. Now, on top of his legal fees, Bloomberg is reporting that Trump is set to run out of money about July, which is around the time when he would be spending or ramping up spending to go head-to-head with President Biden. How do you see this impacting his campaign on the monetary side?
Well, $300 million is a lot of money. I mean, that's got to be historic in terms of civil penalties against an individual. But look, I think ultimately Trump is, he's the populist in this race. Biden is going to be well funded, and Trump probably will be the underdog in terms of campaign fundraising. So it's ultimately got to come down to messaging and being able to get out there and get that message and really make the case to the American people that that he's the better choice going forward to make America great again. And I think where the polls stand right now, certainly with Biden's declining health and questions about his capability to lead the country, I think Trump's in a good position even if he does get out fundraised.
Now, following the Iowa caucuses, 1/3 of exit polls showed of Iowa caucus goers that if Trump got convicted, they wouldn't vote for him in the general election. Now, given Trump's 4 different cases, how do you see a conviction, if that does happen, impacting voter turnout come November?
Well, the odds of a conviction dropped, obviously, with the Georgia case before November. But, I will say this. I don't think most voters are aware of just how ludicrous some of these charges are against Trump. And so if there was a conviction, I think we'd have a national conversation about what these charges were and if they were legitimate. And then I'm pretty sure you'd see Trump voters rally behind the president. And so, ultimately, that is an interesting exit poll, but I don't think it really means a whole lot in the grand scheme of things.
John Sheppy, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Former President Trump spoke just moments ago from his Mar-a-Lago estate. He was addressing the ruling in his New York civil fraud trial.
These are corrupt people. These are people that shouldn't be allowed to do the things they do. And they're using this as weaponization against a political opponent who's up a lot in the polls. There's a fine of $355 million for doing a perfect job, for having paid back a loan with no defaults, with no problems.
Trump said it was a sad day for the country and that the case was election interference. He again stressed that his company committed no fraud and that there were no victims. The former president also criticized New York Attorney General Letitia James, who filed the case, saying she is, quote, totally corrupt. Israeli forces are preparing to battle Hamas terrorists in Rafah, where over 1 million people in the Gaza Strip are taking refuge. Many questions remain about where they'll go for shelter this time. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war.
Construction crews were seen building a wall along the Gaza Strip's border with Egypt. And recent satellite imagery shows that construction crews in Egypt are bulldozing about a 2-mile wide buffer zone in Egypt along its border with the Gaza Strip. This new construction comes as Israel Defense Forces are preparing to fight Hamas terrorists in Rafah near the Egyptian border. And Palestinians continue to be forced to evacuate each city where the fighting takes place. And some are thinking they may soon be forced to go to Egypt.
Rafah is the last safe area, but to go to Egypt, no, it's enough. We are here and that's it. We won't be displaced further. If we went to Egypt, who can guarantee our return to our country?
The Egyptian government on Friday said it was not involved in relocating Palestinians to Egypt. Egypt has also repeatedly warned Israel not to forcibly expel the more than 1 million Palestinians into Egypt. The construction along Egypt's border with the Gaza Strip comes as Israel continues to conduct select operations in Rafah, but it has not begun a full-blown ground offensive in the city. Palestinian officials on Friday said an Israeli airstrike in Rafah killed 10 people, 7 of whom were in the same family.
We are displaced people. We came to Rafah as it was considered safe, but in fact, it is not safe at all.
Meanwhile, Israel is starting to see more destruction on its own streets as Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon continue to fire rockets into northern Israel. And although not from this attack, Hezbollah released a video the day before, allegedly of a strike on an Israeli communications tower near the Lebanese border. The leader of Hezbollah says that Israel will pay in blood for killing civilians. His comments came after local media in Lebanon said Israeli airstrikes killed 4 people, including a woman and her 2 children. Also on Friday, Israel Defense Forces released a video of soldiers delivering humanitarian aid to the Al-Nasser hospital in the Gaza Strip, where Israeli troops recently conducted a raid and detained Hamas terrorists. The IDF said they also provided an additional generator and diesel fuel to ensure the hospital continues to operate. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Mexico seems to be finally tackling illegal immigration, but why now? Some suspect it's to help President Biden's re-election campaign. NTD's Ariane Pasdar has more on that and other immigration updates.
The southern border now relatively empty compared to just a few weeks ago. Official CBP numbers show that the month of January saw under 180,000 encounters, much less than the month before. December saw over 300,000 encounters at the southern border. This comes as the border crisis is becoming one of President Biden's biggest issues. A Gallup poll released this week shows that the main reason Biden critics disapprove of his presidency is the border, followed by the economy and inflation. Now, the Center for Immigration Studies published a report this week saying that Biden's low poll numbers are now causing Mexico to finally tackle the immigration crisis. The center says that Mexico is forcing migrants onto buses and then transporting them all the way away from the US-Mexico border down south to Mexico's border with Guatemala. And some even suspect that criminals want Biden to get re-elected. Representative Tony Gonzalez told Newsweek, "I do think the cartels are trying to carry the Biden administration a couple rounds." This aligns with what the president of the National Border Patrol Council told Fox News this week, saying we see the cartels. They are very intelligent in everything they do. They know how to generate money based on what our politics are. And in New York City, 5 suspects allegedly involved in this attack on police officers near Times Square have been arraigned in court today. All but one are now being held on bail. This comes as the New York Post reports that 2 of the suspects are gang members. The 2 allegedly belong to a gang called Tren de Aragua from Venezuela. And multiple outlets say that this gang is now teaming up with MS-13 in New York City. The 2 gangs are together committing crimes and making money in New York because it's a sanctuary city. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, Iowa's Caitlin Clark is now the NCAA's all-time leading scorer after scoring 49 points last night. Yet her legacy might be the record crowds she draws. Why do you think she attracts so much attention?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons. I mean, she's quite the three-point shooter, for one thing. She broke the scoring record by pulling up on a fast break and hitting a long 3 from near the half-court logo. Now, plenty of players might get pulled just for attempting that kind of shot, but that's actually like right in her wheelhouse. But I think it's also her passing and even playmaking ability that people like to see. You know, when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird entered the NBA like back in 1980, they both brought with them this unselfish passing ability that really was infectious. Fans loved to see it and immediately made both teams better because of it. Clark is a great passer as well. I mean, she does a lot of things well, so you just never know what you'll see next with her.
Well, now shifting gears to golf, Tiger Woods shot a 1/72 yesterday in his return to competitive golf, but today he's withdrawn, citing an illness. Now, was he in line to make the weekend cut?
No, he was a couple of shots off. He actually played 5 holes today, bogeyed his last 2 before exiting. Reportedly, he seemed pretty frustrated as they were carting him off the course. Now, yesterday he said his back had actually locked up on him and he was kind of all over the place. I mean, 5 birdies, 6 bogeys. Well, we don't know anything more about today's illness, unfortunately, but he had missed the last 10 months because of ankle surgery, which was a result of that horrific car accident he was in 3 years ago. But people forget that before that, he had major back problems from 2013 to 2017. I mean, his ranking went from 1st in the world to like somewhere in the 700s after missing a whole lot of events. Hopefully for his sake, whatever this isn't as serious.
Well, now Woods has also discussed the merger talks earlier this week between the PGA and Live Golf, essentially saying they don't really need the money anymore. Now, if that is the case, why would they still want a merger?
You know, I think it's to unite the game of golf. That seems to be the most common refrain. I mean, the negotiations for this merger started last summer, and it started with each side withdrawing their lawsuit against the other. Meanwhile, players who left the PGA for Live were suspended, and there was discussion about whether they should even be let into the 4 majors, which aren't really PGA events. Now, the PGA just announced a multi-billion-dollar investment from some U.S. investors, making them less dependent upon a merger with Live. Now, Woods also clarified that these merger talks are still ongoing. There had been plenty of questions about whether that was the case. But I think fans want to see a united game too, where all the best players in the world play on the same stage.
Now, in men's basketball news, there was an unusual delay last night involving a broken elevator when Farley Dickinson played at Long Island University. What happened there? Yeah, the game was delayed for 17 minutes because Farley Dickinson players got stuck in the elevator at the stadium while going from the court to the locker room. Eventually, they hit the emergency button and firefighters arrived after like 10 minutes. As you can see on this video, it looks like the elevator actually got stuck in between floors, but they did get everyone out all right. This looks like a scene out of the movie Speed. Despite that, Farley Dickinson ended up winning the game in overtime, 84-82. Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us. Thank you, Tiff. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.